what was the buzz at Podcast Evolutions?
Yeah. So at Evolutions, first off, if I just look at the booth, like who had booths and who didn't, the booths were either AI companies or hosting providers. Those are the only two people that had booths. There was really nothing other than that. The hosting providers, again, like you say, money exchanging hands, they are strictly focused on shows. I only talked to one podcasting hosting provider who didn't agree with this. They're only focused on shows that have a monthly download level of 250,000 or higher. And past that, they literally said, don't even waste our time talking to us. Like, all we care about is that. And it's because there's so much money getting exchanged by those few. There's probably only like less than 2,000 people that are there, but all these companies are starting to fight over just those people because that's where the cash is at. So AI is more of what the indies are into because it does help you get that exposure. These bigger people that already have it, they seem to not really care about that. It's kind of smoke and mirrors for them because they're just like, I've already got a massive following. However, with that said, the one thing that all these networks they were talking about, they didn't have boosts, but there's networks everywhere. They were saying, I need to get all of my podcast hosts on other podcasts. And the trouble that they have is, again, I'm not trying to be rude or mean, but most people who work in podcasting don't understand podcasting because they didn't come from it. They've never actually done it. So they're like, okay, how do I get them on the 250,000 plus download shows that are going out every month? And there's a handful of people there that were smart enough to realize any show that's in their niche, no matter how big or small, is perfect. If you can get me on those shows or get my host on those shows, that's a good thing for me to do. So that was a huge level of buzz. It's why I was sought out, because one of my products being Podmatch, it connects guests and hosts for interviews, right? People were like, hey, can I put all my podcasters on there as guests so they can get people to have them on their show? So yeah, that's definitely something that people are realizing is it works, right? Which is funny because people don't really understand podcasting, but they just know it works, even these big companies. So yes, that is, again, the buzz being all hosting providers only focused on the top 0.1%. And then past that, their strategy is to get them on podcasts. And then across the board, anyone who wasn't really big was super just jumping from AI talk to AI talk. Those are the rooms that were full every single time. But the big players, not interested. They don't care. They don't really see value in that right now.
It strikes me that you seem to think that there's still a lot of opportunity for us being a guest on smaller shows, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I want to lean into that just a bit more. Before that, quick word from our sponsors. Quick shout out to our sponsors over at Fran Bridge Consulting. They specialize in placing you with the best non-food franchises on earth. And the best part, it's 100% free. Do yourself a favor and sign up for a free call with the CEO, John Austinson, today over at franbridgeconsulting.com. He'll even send you a free book, 100% free. Go to franbridgeconsulting.com, chat with the CEO, John, today. All right, let's get into the episode. Okay, we're back. So, Alex, tell me, before I go on a podcast, what type of show should I be looking for? What kind of show should I be on? Do they need to have 250,000 downloads, or can they be a smaller show? What should I be looking for?
Well, first off, like a big show can be good if it's in your niche, right? It's got to actually be in your niche though. If it's not, it doesn't matter. Like if there's 1 million downloads on a show that's about mental health, but you strictly talk about how to improve your golf game, that's not going to do well for you. Like it doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, where a lot of people miss it is they're like, well, I want the good backlinks. The backlinks that are good are coming from Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all these other companies. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have high authority domains, but even the biggest podcaster on the planet, their domain isn't near as big as a backlink from Google, a backlink from Amazon, right? They're not even close. No independent has a domain authority on their website as big as those big companies. So when search engines are indexing these things, even Joe Rogan, if he links to you from his website, that's not as powerful as a link from Apple. There's more people who go to Apple's website every single minute than probably go to Joe Rogan's website in a week, right? Like that's just how it works. So you're looking at the highest domain authority. So that automatically levels the playing field. If a podcast has 1 download, then that doesn't make a difference. The domain authority that it's coming from is still from the big websites, as long as they are distributing to all the players. So real quick there, being on a podcast, just make sure that it's on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, right? Which most podcasts do at this point. Be cautioned by the person that says, I don't use a hosting provider. I host it on my own website, because that probably won't get distributed everywhere. But again, to just share this overarching idea here, it's all about the domain authority of where it's coming from. That strictly means how authoritative that website is. So again, it's coming from those high levels. It doesn't matter about the big ones, but going back to the idea of the actual niche, that's the most important thing. There are a lot of people I find who just will go on any podcast, and that can be good for a little bit to like really hone in your message to figure it out. Or if it's a friend, somebody you have good rapport with, or it's like, man, I've always wanted to share this story, that's fine. But in general, the people that do the best as a guest, they stay focused in their lane. An example of this, I'll give you both examples real quick. The other day I was on a podcast. It's strictly about mental health, and it's about anyone with disabilities and things like that, things that have held them back. I've never been on a podcast like that, but I decided to go on one yesterday strictly because as a kid, I was really dyslexic and I really struggled to learn to read and write. And I'd never been able to share that story, but so many people that I meet have asked me about it. So in my mind, I was like, it'd be great if there was a podcast episode with me sharing that story in detail that I can then direct people to when they ask, instead of being like, sure, let's get on a 30-minute call and I'll tell you about all my struggles as a kid, right? Instead of doing that, now I have a piece of content that people can use. So that's like the strategy of jumping out of your niche. But in general, I really only go places where I can actually talk about podcasting when it's valuable for the audience. So again, I've had people, I used golf as an example earlier. I've had golf podcasts ask me to come on to talk about podcasting. I'm like, there might be a few people who are interested in your audience, but in general, I just tell them like, that's not going to serve the people that are trying to get better at their golf game. Like they're not trying to start a podcast. You like the idea because you're a podcaster, but in general, it's not going to serve them. So I typically say no to those so I can stay in my lane where I can just share about podcast guesting and podcast hosting, right? That's really it. I want to pause there and let anyone ask any questions along the way or give Mark a chance to say something while I try to catch my breath here after that many words.
I just had a quick question about the backlinks because so for my line of work, I do a lot of like seminars and programming, and my podcast is really going to be about like streamlining like quick actionable tips and solutions. But I have a lot of like, I work with the government, I work with employer groups, insurances, and I just wondered, a lot of them had asked about, when I'm going to launch my podcast, linking in those places. So like if I have a backlink through like, for instance, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, like they have me listed. So as one of my things, instead of like LinkedIn, it actually has like a link to my podcast. Is there a benefit to that because it's a larger organization?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can see Ben knows this stuff really well too. And Ben's like, yes, that I would like that backlink. And if you have any .gov opportunities, those links are super high quality. And all so that is like
list my podcast like everywhere that I can. It should always be part of
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And yes, absolutely. But like I said, if I would love those backlinks as well because they're very high authority domains. And all that means is there's enough people talking about it and has enough of an established reputation that even search engines and AI know that is a very high level company. And there's no doubt, right? And if it's a .gov, it has to reach a certain criteria. So those are automatically bumped to the top. If you have links to those, it's huge. When we launched podpros.com, which is like if you will, the umbrella of my companies, I used to call it my umbrella corp. And then like, does anyone remember like Resident Evil? Anyone? Okay. I did say that. I'm like, I feel like I'm evil for even saying that. So I just call it the umbrella of our products, right? That's what it is. We're not an umbrella corp. I don't have anything crazy going on, but I worked with an SEO guy and it was like 3 weeks after we launched and he looked at it, he's like, he's like, I've been in this for like 10 years. He's like, how did you get such a high authority on this domain so fast? He's like, I've never seen that before. And it was because I was just going on podcasts like crazy. And that's all I was mentioning was that. And he's like, man, this is going to be easy for me to work with. He's like, because you've already done so much of the groundwork that takes people years to do. And you've done it in weeks somehow. And he's just like, I've never seen anyone do that before. And it was I wasn't asking people for backlinks. All I was doing was going on podcasts. So anyway, yes, anywhere you can get a link where it's appropriate to ask, do it and have them go to your podcast. Now, when I say go to your podcast, it should be, this is a good point here. And Mark, I'm sorry, I'm totally derailing to the next conversation you have here, but make sure it's a website domain that you own. So you don't want to send them to your podcast on Apple because then that's telling that link that Apple is the high authority. You want it to go to your podcast website that you actually own. So have your own domain. It also shouldn't be your hosting provider website. So like I personally use Buzzsprout. They're also here in Jacksonville, Florida. Let's go. But I think my domain with them is podcasting.buzzsprout.com, which I'm very proud of. I like grabbed that. I'm like, oh, no one has that one. Cool. But I don't send people there because again, the underlying URL is Buzzsprout. So it's telling all these links that Buzzsprout is high authority. I want it to go to my website, PodPros. And that's where I just have a page, a section of it has all of my podcast episodes. So again, you want it to go to something that you own. Does that help?
Thinking of like all of the different organizations that I work with, like having them listed everywhere.
What do you mean?
Well, I just did an event with Bank of America and Seneca Women, and they have just launched this new podcast thing. And so they've asking me for information, like when all this stuff launches. So like being able to have those links automatically.
Yeah.
My wheels are turning. I'm like thinking of all of the groups that I work with and like sending it to everybody.
Yeah, that's great. That's gonna be that's exciting for you. You're gonna have a very successful launch. Let's put it that way. So that's cool.
Well, I think there was a lot of great stuff there. One of which I think is important is the idea of getting backlinks, meaning you want to have links to your website as many places as possible so you can drive your listing for your website up the Google charts, right? If you're not on the first page of Google, you don't exist, is kind of the concept there. Which also leads me to kind of think in my head, but I found a show that has a good niche. It's going to be on iTunes, Spotify, all that. What do you see as an effective call to action as a guest? Because I think there's a balance between giving a really good, strong call to action and giving too many calls to action. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
like when you're going to go on a show, I assume that, I want to convert this audience into a consumer of my product, service, podcast, et cetera. How many links are you giving? What are some best practices for calls to action as a guest?
There's always a couple ways to take this. Do we want to talk about it from the standpoint of a host being a guest on other shows? Is that the way we want to kind of direct it, or just a guest in general?
I think a guest, we could go both ways, depending how specific we want to go. But I think we're in a point here. We're in an inflection point where business owners in general understand that podcasts are a good place to reach their audience.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I also know that there's wrong ways and right ways to go about that, so I'm just kind of trying to get your thoughts as someone who runs Podmatch, sees thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews taking place. What are you seeing as best practices for business owner being a guest on shows? How many links should I be giving? Obviously, we want to link to our website for the authority. What else should we be doing as podcast guests?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I think there's two different things here. There's the call to action that you're giving at the end of the episode, which is when a host says, "Hey, thank you so much for being here, John. I really appreciate you. Where can listeners find out more about you?" That's one thing. The other thing is actually the description of the podcast episode, the show notes, whatever it is you want to call it, right? In that, I think it's appropriate to have multiple links, because if someone's digging that deep, they're actually looking for something specific. And I don't do this yet, but this is my next thing I'm going to be implementing. After my guest on a podcast, reaching out, saying thank you, which is something I do, but saying, "Hey, in the show notes, do you mind including these few links?" Because again, I'm only going to mention, I'll get to it, but I'm only mention one thing on the actual podcast, but here's where I want you to link to, and just simply requesting it. And if they say, "Hey, listen, I don't do that with all these links," no worries. But what I don't think that you should do is make a whole, I don't even know what to call it, like a Rolodex of everywhere to find you and for the show notes, right? So when you email them, which is something I'm going to be doing, like I said, I want to send them to my main website, to my podcast, and to some other primary thing that they might be interested in. I don't even know what that is yet, but I don't want to say Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, right? One of those other pages should have all those things, but once again, be a domain that I own, because something you don't want to have happen is competition. Because again, if Google, let's just use that, or the big search engine, right? So if search engines in general are looking at this description and there's 10 links for you, they're not going to compete for which one is the primary, right? So you want to just have the key ones in there. And I think that's a really important point, but starting to ask hosts, "Hey, I know I only mentioned this one call to action. Can you put these 3 or these 2 things in the show notes?" That'd be very helpful. And I don't think it should be more than that personally, but anyway.
What do you think about linking to Linktree that has like all those different things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I did that for a little bit, and then we just built an internal page that looks like Linktree, but it's on our domain. And okay. Ben, I know that Ben could be doing this part of this talk for me for sure, because Ben knows this stuff. Ben, do you mind weighing in on that? Because I think you've done something similar as well, right?
The short version, you already touched on this, Alex, is wherever someone goes is the beneficiary of that traffic. You want to be that beneficiary for the SEO in your long-term ranking. So even if it's as simple as just a landing page with a couple links or a landing page with an embedded player, you want to send it to soda.com. You want to send it to your website so you're the beneficiary of all that traffic. And that's the simple way to put it. Don't send people somewhere else, because then they're getting all the goodwill of what you've built.
Ben is hired. He said that so much better than I do. That was great. Well said. Soda, do you own soda.com? Because that is a great domain. I'm just saying.
That's a great domain.
I do not own soda.com, but I'm sure it's probably taken. Let's check.
I'm guessing. Anyway,
real quick, I actually own FCK. So it's the F word with no U, linktree.com. And I haven't done anything with it, but the concept is why build a Linktree? I'm on a tangent. I'm on a soapbox. Go on.
I love it. Cool. Anyway, so again, the notes, send a follow-up or just request. These are the few links I want in there. Again, they should always be your domain, I think. But going to Mark's other side of this question, which is the actual call to action during the episode, I find one thing works best because we got to think about like the world we live in when people are listening to podcasts. I mean, podcast consumption continues to climb, but we're all busy people. We're driving, we're cleaning, we're cooking, we're in the gym, we're on a walk. We're typically doing something else. It's mostly mindless for us, right? Like, I don't think people are listening to podcasts when they're like working on some sort of mathematical equation. Like that's probably not happening, right? It's typically when we're doing something that makes us feel more automatic, which also is when we're primed and we're at our peak for creativity. So that's why so many people who listen to podcasts say they listen to learn, because when you're cleaning and whatever you're hearing is really what your brain is focused on, but by moving and stuff like that, it sparks our creativity inside of us. There's a lot of science behind that I am not qualified to talk about. But if you think about it, a lot of your creative ideas come from the shower, and that's because you're on autopilot when you're in the shower, right? So your brain is freed up to think about something else. So podcasting really has that benefit. But the thing is, we're all, I don't know, like we don't have the greatest memories. We're doing, our mind starts wandering with podcasting. If at the end, if Mark says, Alex, where can listeners find out more about you today? And I give you 3 things and they're trying to remember those, and then it immediately automatically rolls into the next episode while you're driving. You're like, ooh, another episode. And you totally forget everything I said. So I think it's got to just be one thing as a call to action. It's got to be really sticky. Now, during the episode, if you are a podcast host, that should come up naturally, right? So at some point during the episode, the listener might be like, wow, I'm really liking Ben a lot. And I'm going to look up Ben's podcast that he's referenced twice already. Like, not as like you've got to go listen to my podcast, but just like, wow, he mentioned a really interesting episode. I'm going to cue that up for later. So you might be able to grab them there. So I don't think the primary call to action should be directly to a podcast. But again, it's got to be something that's singular, that's sticky, that's easy to remember. An example, someone's like, why don't you just send people to alexsanfilippo.com? I'm like, because I can't even really spell that, right? Like, that's not an easy domain for me to be like, yeah, go to alexsanfilippo.com. And so like my call to action I do every time, I'll literally share it right now. Hey, thank you so much for having me, Soda. I really appreciate the time. Yeah, if listeners want to find out more about me, everything I do is podcasting related. And you can just go to podpros.com/win. On that page, I'll give you 5 quick wins that you can read in less than 5 minutes. I don't want your email address or anything like that. I just want to help you as a podcast guest or host or aspiring podcast guest or host. And again, that's podpros.com/win. And Soda, thank you again for having me. That's my call to action every single time. You'll find my podcast on there. You'll find a way to get more. It's just the top of the funnel that I'm bringing people into. So from the podcast to top of funnel. Mark, I said a lot there, so I'm going to pass it back over to you now. Sorry for talking so much.
No, I love where this conversation went. And there's a few, I think, questions that come up from this. One of which, and I mentioned this in the notes, is creating, because just saying, hey, go to podpros.com. The problem with sharing a link like that is it's hard to attribute the traffic. It's hard to track, like, where's this traffic coming from? What are your thoughts on having the links in the descriptions be bit.ly links or deep links, something that's a little bit more attributable? I know, okay, these listeners came from this show or that show or this marketing funnel, et cetera.
I don't do this right now. It's super smart. I have not quite found the capacity to do unique links on each of these, but yes, that's very smart. So you can actually figure out, here's why. One of the main reasons is if you're not really sure what kind of podcast you can be on, you can learn that real quick based off of who's following your call to action. Now, I do think when you are actually on a podcast episode, I can't give you a bit.ly link or something like that, because it's like, what were the 4 letters and numbers that he said after that, right? Like, it's got to be something really unique, but you can still do something like I could do podpros.com/Mark, and that's always just coming from this, and it would just redirect you to something else. So you can do that. And I'll say this, I think the podcast guests that are tracking their results the best are the ones that figure out how to do this really well. I am not there at this point. So I want to be fully transparent that I'm not currently doing that. But Mark, it's brilliant if you have the capacity, the know-how, and are actually tracking that's a really helpful thing to do.
I thought that there's analytics that will tell you, because like on my website, if somebody shops or books something, I know exactly where they came from. Like Google, it'll tell me exactly, like Instagram, it tells you that. So is that
kind of, but like, again, if I said it on your podcast and someone just opens up their browser and types it in, it looks like they just came from nowhere, right? Like there wasn't a link before it. They just typed it in because they heard me say it. So you lose that tracking right there. Because then you're like, cool, I had 1,000 people show up from nowhere today. I wonder if that was one podcast or the 10 that I was on, right? That's where you kind of run into that problem. John, I think you had something on this topic, right?
Yeah. I was on one of the calls that you had a couple of weeks ago. Where you were talking about this, where you just send them to like one place instead of like 50 different places. Do you think that it's a good idea to send them to like a free program or just a one web page, or what do you think would be like the best call to action to send somebody to?
What works the best for me, and I'll give you an analogy here. So like a lot of people think of podcasting as the top of funnel. I actually think of it as pre-funnel completely. Podcasting as a guest and as a host, it's really developed know, like, and trust with a listener. And so when you do that and they realize, okay, I feel like I know this person a little bit. I definitely like them and I think I can trust them. Your call to action should lead them to the very top of the funnel. Top of funnel means they get something before they give you something. I always use this same example. I've been happily married, I should say, I've been married for 10.5 years and happily married for 10.5 years. Let me put it that way. I have some people like, I've been married for 10 years and happy for 3. So that's not me. I've been happy the whole time. However, let's just imagine I'm single Alex. I'm in a bar. I'm not going to walk up to a girl and be like, hey, I'd love to buy you a drink, but first, can I get your phone number? Just doesn't work that way. So again, even though you've developed a little bit of that know, like, and trust, I think it's still pre-funnel unless there is something specific that you like, I have to email this to you, like a book or something like that. And I can talk about some of that stuff because I think that'd be valuable. But for me, I just want them to feel like, okay, I now confirmed everything I just heard with Alex by going through these 5 things. And just so y'all know, the end of that page, podpros.com/win, if you want 5 more, you've got to join my community. It takes like 2 seconds to sign up, but it'll give you, 5 more things. And then from there, there's another call to action of like, hey, do this, do that, right? And it brings them into the funnel. But I find the best thing to do is just, again, continue adding that value that you just did through the podcast episode. Does that answer the question, John?
Yeah. So like I had set up, like I'm setting up like a free 7-day workshop to bring people into my community, but specifically, conversations between you and Mark and over the past, it's just that has formed. And it's, I was thinking maybe just before, from the talk that you had last couple, was it 2 weeks ago? I think it was, where you were talking about this. And now they're just confirming it. I think it just might be a good idea to put like a web page, landing page kind of thing with like 5 simple tips that people can do to set up evening routines and morning routines for like podcasters and stuff like that. So I think something's forming there for me. So thank you.
I think you're talking about that. You said it's 7-day thing, right? Is that what you're saying you have? It would be interesting is if you told people that like on that page, if you made a very condensed version of those 7 things and told people to go there, and then the call to action at the bottom is like, hey, if you want to go into these in detail, I'm doing a free workshop on it. So like again, that call to actions, go check out these 7 things and they can see them all right there. But like, hey, if you really want to learn them and implement them, like here's where you do that. That might be interesting as well because it reinforces what they already showed up for versus it being something different than what the funnel is. Does that make sense? Right? Like kind of keeping it all coherent might be an interesting way to do that.
Is it possible to do like a separate web page on Mighty Networks to do something like that? I don't know. That might be a little bit more technical stuff.
Yeah, that kind of goes over my head there. Sorry. I mean, I would definitely, if we had like 3 hours, I would totally just do a screen share and we'd try it right now. But no one wants to listen to me for 3 hours. So I'm not sure how that works.
Okay, I'll figure something out. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
Brilliant. So we hit on a lot of great points here. I've got a few more questions here as we lean into this landing page, trackable links. Quick word from our sponsors though beforehand. Yo, are you interested in business ownership? For many entrepreneurs, the journey starts with non-food franchising. Franchising is simply the better option for many entrepreneurs, and demand is at an all-time high. Lucky for you, John Austinson, founder of Franbridge Consulting, is here to help you today. John and his Franbridge Consulting team are part of the largest brokerage in the US and are constantly vetting the market thoroughly. Franbridge is hands down the premier source for the best opportunities in the non-food franchising world. They will find the best business for you, your personality, and your location. From healthcare to dumpsters, from youth soccer to oil changes, even insulation and windows. And the best part, it's 100% fee-free, no additional costs to you. You may have heard John on Entrepreneurs on Fire. He has served as an Inc. 500 franchisor, a multi-brand franchisee, and in fact, he's one of the top 1% consultants nationwide. Listen, sign up for a free consultation with the CEO, John, today, not his assistant, not his sales team. Sign up for free with John today at franbridgeconsulting.com. That's franbridgeconsulting.com. And guess what? He's even going to send you a copy of his book for free, Non-Food Franchising. For free book. You got to love it. So go to franbridgeconsulting.com right now. All right, let's get into the episode.
And we're back. So, Alex, we've been talking about how to be an effective guest on podcasts, how to go on a podcast and actually generate some income from that experience. We've talked a lot about tracking links and so on and so forth. And I'm also curious, you mentioned that you don't even collect an email. So if somebody goes from a podcast to your website, it's like, this is like basic marketing funnel creation 101 is get their email so you own the audience. I'm curious, why aren't you asking for an email when you deliver those value propositions? Aren't you afraid that you're going to miss opportunities?
That's a great question. And so for me, I used to start off with that. And I just realized that people would get what they want. And then the next email I send, they just unsubscribe. And so I was like, you know what I want is to pre-filter these people more or less, right? Like, I get that maybe I leave a little bit on the table for that. But in general, if you go through those 5 things, you heard me on a podcast and you still don't want to give me your email address, then I'm probably not a good fit to work with you anyway. But what I find now is I have a very low unsubscribe rate, like very low. And it's because I'm pre-filtering them to determine whether they actually want to be involved in this or not. And so that was just the role that I took. I prefer it that way. It's less work on me to have less people to kind of filter through and figure out, are you serious? Are you not type of thing. That's just the role I took. Some people who are probably much better at email marketing, much better at building out funnels than I am, probably would disagree with that because they're really good at it. I'm not. This is what works well for me and for my business and my overall capacity, and it's bringing the result that I want. So that's why I've chosen to do this. But it's a great question. And I think that definitely I can't say my way is the right way. It's right for me and where I'm at, though.
What is that? What is your goal over the next 5 years? Like, if there's one thing you could accomplish in your business, what would that goal be?
Yeah, my goal, I want to help 8,000 people stay in podcasting. I know it's like super specific, but it's like 90, or I guess it's 85% failure right now. So I'm excited to see that's changing a little bit. But in general, 85% of people who start will stop before the end of 1 year. And for every one podcast that starts, there's pretty much one that is leaving. And that's why we always have about 400,000 active podcasts in a given time. I want to help increase that by 8,000 podcasts. So my goal is to find those 8,000 people that want help, that are open to it, they won't all necessarily pay me, but at the very least, I want to have some impact in their overall success as a podcaster. So next 5 years, that's my goal. I'd actually call that a 3-year goal. I don't know if I have a 5-year goal, but next 3-year goal, that's what I'm after.
Great goal. Super clear. I'm a big fan of adding numbers to your specific calls to action and, I guess, a mission statement. I will say I'm kind of sometimes shocked at how long it takes people to produce their episodes.
No kidding.
How long does it take? I'm curious. How long does it take you to produce an episode of your show?
So my show format is super unique. You've been on my show. I'm not on those episodes at all. And I sub out all the work. So aside from the 2 interviews I do every quarter and my 1 solo episode, which again, I don't actually touch any of it afterwards. So it's 15 minutes for my solo episode and 30 minutes on each interview. Let's just say I spend about 2 hours a quarter on my podcast completely. That's everything.
Through all the outsourcing. But I'm looking at your episodes. Most of your episodes are short. And I'm looking at Podcasting Made Simple, 14 minutes, 12 minutes, 12 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes. I thought podcast episodes are supposed to be 30 minutes or longer. How did you come to the 12-minute mark?
It's funny. I'm glad you asked this. No one's ever asked me that. So I work with podcasters, and the amount of podcasters I talk to who don't listen to podcasts is mind blowing. Like, I talk to podcast hosts all the time. Like, I don't actually really listen to podcasts. I'm like, oh man, I just don't have time. And that immediately made me think, okay, if I want to offer true valuable education to podcasters, it has to be short and exactly what they're looking for versus more broad. And so that's the role that we took. And since switching this format, my show in the last, I don't know what it's been now. It's been maybe just a year and a couple months since I changed from a long form format, and my show has grown more than 10x since that time. And I'm not one to track my analytics on an ongoing or daily basis, but it's just been skyrocketing. I get great feedback on it. As a matter of fact, Mark, I just made the show even shorter. If you listen to my latest episodes, and I know Soda listens, so Soda might actually know this, my intro is 14 seconds long now, and my outro is 9 seconds. So I've just like streamlined it even more. And I wanted to do that specifically because on most of these apps, you click that little skip button and it fast forwards 15 seconds. So I wanted anybody who's heard my podcast to be able to click it one time and they know it's the guests introducing themselves at that point. And for me, this format has worked. It is not for everybody. I actually have had a number of very bad reviews on the podcast because like it just doesn't, it's just, I wanted to listen for an hour, right? Like it was good. I didn't really like the short format, but for the tribe that I'm serving, this is kind of the volume that just works the best.
Made me a fan.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Well, and I was, it's funny we talk about this because I was looking at my Apple Analytics, and I mean, this might seem intuitive, but the shorter episodes had a much longer completion or much more consistent completion rate, right?
Yeah.
I think there's this misnomer that, people will listen, they'll say, oh, this is what I want to listen to. And they put it down and they just listen for another hour. I don't know that I don't do that. Do y'all do that? When you're listening to podcasts, how often are you listening to an entire hour-long podcast?
I usually know by like 8 or 10 minutes whether or not I'm going to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, sometimes
depends.
I might split it up in half if it's a longer one and it seems like it's interesting, but more often than not, I look for ones that are shorter.
This is a good point. Can I comment on this, Mark, real quick? This proves an interesting point that I shared when I was speaking at where I was at Podcast Movement Evolutions. I was actually sharing about this. And one of the main reasons that people stop listening to podcasts is because it doesn't deliver on the promise that was made. So the reason we stopped listening to an hour-long episode early on is because if the title is like, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, near the beach, so I'm going to use this as an example, how to become a better surfer, and you're 15 minutes in and surfing hasn't come up once, it's not delivering on the promise, the expectation that you have in your mind, so you're out. You'll go find it somewhere else. However, if it was like, hey, for the next hour, we're going to do a masterclass on the top 10 most important things you have to do if you want to improve your ability to surf well, even if it's small or big wave, and they dive into super practical things, you'll listen to that probably multiple times to be able to get it all because it's delivering on the promise. And you can still have fun stories in there. But at the end of the day, if it's talking about where this person went to school, what their favorite subject was, what their other hobbies are, and then there's like 3 minutes at the end to talk about surfing, again, it's not delivering on the promise. Therefore, it's not worthy of any of our time to listen to because we're all listening with some form of intent. Anyway, I digress. That's my thoughts on that, though.
That's so true. I have a couple of your episodes I've listened to a couple of times. And I usually don't do that either.
I'm officially Soda. I'd like a shirt with your face on it because I'm now like I'm a huge fan of Soda now. So like that's what I'm going to say. So
it's interesting, Alex, that you actually you went down to short format. I can speak up to here up in Canada. What's going on here? One of my friends is in radio, and the biggest radio station here in Canada is AM 680. And they have very short spurts of news that goes on every 5 to 10 minutes. And it's the largest station, and they're beating out CBC. CBC's like CNN down in the US. They're the largest listened to across all of Canada is AM 680. So it's interesting that, you went shorter with your times and your audience is growing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you brought that up. It is all about the audience, right? Because I was talking about this recently and somebody really challenged me. He's like, my audience likes to listen to hour and a half episodes. I'm like, I don't know about that. And he opened up his analytics through Apple where most of his listeners were, and he had like a super high completion rate. And he's like, all right, well, now that I showed you this and kind of proved you wrong, he's like, will you be a guest? I was like, I've never done an hour and a half podcast episode, but sure. It was great. And I got good feedback from it. The thing is, it's all about knowing the audience. If podcasters or people that just sit around and listen to podcasts all day, I could probably do a 2-hour episode and be great. I mean, an example is like, everyone talks about Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan's episodes are like 4 hours long sometimes. I know people that will listen to the whole thing, and it blows my mind because, again, being a podcaster, I'm like, what? You listen to podcasts, right? But I'm just saying, like, there's obviously, depending on the audience and how well you know them, how you should know how long your episode should be. And Mark brought up a good point. Looking at what it's, if your primary listenership is coming from Apple, looking at the completion rate is a great tell if people are enjoying it or not.
Well, and I've been thinking a lot about how to actually format the episodes of After Hours Entrepreneur. It's, my show has continuously gone through evolutions over the last 300 episodes. When I think about all the amount of time that's just not really productive, it doesn't really serve what the person's clicking on the link for. To your point, someone clicks to learn about surfing, and then you spend the next 8 minutes talking about your background and what it was like growing up in California, and your dad wasn't there for you. Like, people aren't really tuning in for that typically, right?
Yeah, unless it truly is like a lifestyle storytelling podcast. In that case, sure, bring it. It's all on the table. People tuned in because, again, it's delivering on the promise. The promise was a life story. But yeah, if it's a surfing podcast and it's not about surfing, then what are we doing here, right?
Well, and I think storytelling, there's certain components that every podcast needs to have. There needs to be some storytelling. It needs to be entertaining. Like, because I'll ask this question to clients. They're like, why would people listen to this? Like, well, it's entertaining. I'm like, if it's not entertaining, it doesn't matter. Like, you need to at least have some juice there, But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking back, and, I would spend the first 8 minutes of my episodes just kind of like asking, how did you get here? Let's flesh out your story. But when I thought about it, and when I talked to my listenership, I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I'm talking to business owners, side hustlers. Most of the time, they don't really care about how you got started with Instagram. All they care about is, how can I get more leads from Instagram?
Yeah. One thing that I've seen very few people do, but I think if you can do it successfully, it's a great move. At the beginning, instead of sharing that, if you find it's just not super engaging for them, you can say, hey, I just had Soda on the podcast, and for the 8 minutes, we talked about how she got where she is today. It's a really fascinating story. If you jump over this link, you can catch that part of it. But for now, we're going to go ahead and dive into what we're talking about today, which is XYZ. Because then anyone who's like, wow, I'd actually like, and typically what happens, someone will listen to the episode and be like, wow, Soda's super interesting. I'm going to go back and listen and even watch that first 8 minutes about her life story. And then you can also see if anyone's ever doing it, right? If you track those analytics because it's on YouTube or something like that, and you're like, cool, no one's ever clicked on this, you made the right choice by removing that as part of the show. But that would be an interesting idea as a call to action just from the start of like, hey, there's some extra time here that we got into, go check it out. Or even making that some sort of gated content might be interesting.
I dig that. I kind of want to go and rewind a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the financial side of the podcasting industry. You mentioned your podcast evolutions, and really the only question that these businesses were interested in was, how many downloads do you get? How much do you make? How much can you make me? I'm just thinking about sponsorship as a whole. When do you think the right time to land a sponsor would be? Is there a way to land sponsors outside of just how many downloads do you get? And, the reason, again, I want to kind of dive into this, we're doing, basically, this is a big project in the mastermind group here over the coming weeks, is how can we land sponsors? We're doing workshops and things of that nature. In fact, we have a workshop next Monday. So I hope everyone's going to be there. But what do you think we need to do to make ourselves attractive enough to actually find sponsors for our shows?
To me, sponsorship is all about alignment. How aligned am I with this organization, with this person, with this network, whatever it is, right? It's all about that alignment. And the power of that really comes with the niche that you have. And this is all on the side of, if you have millions of downloads, that stuff doesn't matter as much because you could probably sell a mattress, right? And there's a lot of big podcasters who do that and make a ton of money doing it. And that's fine. But I'm talking about if, hey, you're an indie podcaster where you don't have millions of downloads every month, then you've got to be a little bit more strategic with it. Here's the thing. There are companies out there that if you have the exact niche and your audience is exactly who they're trying to sell to, they might be willing to give you a ton of money just to be put in front of that audience, right? Even just for 30 seconds, but it has to have a niche. So again, if you're like, hey, I got a podcast that covers everything, like lifestyle, business, being alive, having fun in life, and 10 other things, it's going to be very hard to find a sponsor unless, again, you have the numbers to prove that it's valuable. But if you don't, they're like, I'm a mattress and you never mentioned sleep. And you're like, oh, that's one of the 30 things we talk about. It's like, cool. So 1 out of 30 times, I'm going to find somebody that might be interested. Now, if you say, I have a podcast strictly to help people sleep through investing in premium sleep services and products like mattresses, better air filters, all these different things, right? Now, if I'm a premium mattress company, I might be like, okay, let me hear more about that, because it sounds like the the 50 or 100 people that listen to that might all be primed to buy my $20,000 product I have, which would be, I don't know if mattresses cost, they don't cost that much. It's ridiculous. My $5,000 top end mattress, right? So they're doing the math in their head, like 5,000 times 20. If that's all you have, they're like, that's worth me trying to invest 15 grand in to see if that works, right? Because again, you have that right audience. So it's got to be alignment with the niche that you're actually serving and proof that you know who you're serving, which goes beyond just, oh, they're 18 to 35 years old on average. They're mostly in America, but also in Canada and also in Mexico, right? It goes beyond that. And you say, hey, no, this is people that are high achievers, high income earners that realize how they're going to continue to level up in their life is to get better sleep on a consistent basis. So they're always listening to figure out ways to improve that. Again, you go to that mattress company, you go to that company that tells you to drink this electrolyte water before you go to bed. I'm just making this stuff up, right? How to make your room darker, how to better alarm or morning routine. Those companies are all going to look at that and say, I don't care if there's 10 people or 1,000 people listening. They're all primed to buy my super expensive service or product. I think that when you can get that level, again, alignment with the niche, that's how you can do really well.
Specificity. And it's funny you mentioned this. I've been negotiating an advertising deal with an AI company. I'm big into AI. I'm talking a lot about it. And we were very close to getting there, but they were kind of like, we don't know that there's that specificity in your show. Cause I'm speaking to all sorts of entrepreneurial issues on the After Hours Entrepreneur. I'm not specifically talking about tech, AI. If my show is solely targeted at podcasters, well, then maybe an AI that helps podcasters create content more quickly would be a better alignment. So I hear what you're saying there.
Because you could also do something like if your podcast was literally focused on content creation for busy entrepreneurs, right? Then an AI company would be like, yep, that's who we're here for. Like clearly there's an alignment there. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly that point there. And I think that early on, that's how you really just knock it out of the park, showing people, hey, I've got who I've got who you're trying to sell to right here. And they are loyal and they're here with me every week or whenever you're producing episodes.
What do you think has created this transition? How many people? So actually, let me ask you this: how many people are registered on Podmatch.com as guests?
It's a good question. I don't look at that too much. I have no idea. I'm so sorry. Thousands,
tens of thousands, though.
Yeah. I'm not really sure the exact number. I'm so sorry, but yes, you're right.
I mean, why do you think there's this shift? Because I'm getting hit up all the time by business owners that want to be guests on podcasts. Is there something that happened that made people say, okay, I need to be a guest on more shows? I mean, I even made a presentation at PodFest about this. There's people paying up to $50,000 to be a guest on one show.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, absolutely. We're seeing podcasters, because the high churn rate, which my goal is to help with that a little bit, always stays around 400,000. Like it's been that way. We're for the first time in 33 months, I think it's just spiked over 400,000 active podcasts, but the top line number continues to grow. So people are like, oh, there's more podcasts than that. No, they're quitting as fast as they're starting. So, but the thing is, and how this also, just so everyone knows, this is how you tell the health of the industry. And I got asked this at Podcast Movement Evolutions. People are like, what is your criteria for knowing if the industry is healthy? I was like, there's only one metric you need to track. Is podcast listenership growing? If yes, it's healthy. If no, it's unhealthy. That's it. Nothing else matters at all, right? If there's more people listening, then there's more people can always dive into it. And I know I'm getting the answer here, but if you look at Edison Research, Pacific Content, all these companies that do the data analytics, conversion rates for advertisers, for products, for services is at the highest in any form of media in podcasting. So any other way, it's not even close. It's like it blows everything out of the water. So as business owners, we're realizing it's really not a lot of work for me to jump on a podcast and just answer questions that I already know the answer to. And then that gets sent out everywhere. And it's going to grow my business because people are going to be interested in it. People are seeing how valuable it is to be a podcast guest at a more rapid rate than ever before. Going back to that 400,000 active podcasters, I can't remember the company that's doing this research, but somebody was looking at who's actively looking to be a guest on podcasts. There's estimated to be over 12 million people right now actively looking to be a guest, right? I don't know how that criteria is figured out, but I'm guessing it's people who've been on more than one show and are continuing to search, right? So like you think of the difference there. We're seeing that people are realizing, oh man, everyone I know is listening to podcasts. I should start being on them because I have something of value that I would gain from that. So, I mean, we're just seeing it blow up right now. Even on our side of things, we see, here's the thing. We do zero marketing with podcast guests. As a matter of fact, when I meet somebody who I think would be a good guest on a podcast, I don't even tell them what I do. They're going to find it themselves. But when I meet a host, I'm like, hey, do you need help finding guests? Do you want to streamline that process? Is there anything else I can help you with? Because if I serve you and you work with me, the rest just seems to follow. Through and through, that's what we're seeing. I have some concerns with that for the future health of podcasting, but in general, the opportunity, people are just realizing how valuable it is to be on podcasts because it works.
I was talking to an agency owner last week. I don't remember the exact number, but I said, hey, if I was to sign up with you as a client because I want to be a guest on more shows, what does that look like? They're like, well, over the course of, and again, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something along the lines of over the course of 3 months, we'll get you placed on 9 shows and it's 15 grand. And I was like, whoa, you're going to put me on 15 grand to go on 9 shows? And the fact that they could make that offer tells me that people are paying it.
Oh yeah. Maybe we're all in the wrong business because you can do that on Podmatch. If you're going to do that in that's not unrealistic. In 3 months, you'd pay like $68, I think. So clearly I got into the wrong business, but anyway, that's not, I'm not being serious. Yeah, but here's the thing that's interesting though, Mark, and this is something that's keeping me up at night right now because the rate of growth of people trying to be guests on podcasts is getting really competitive. And one of my concerns, this is really early stage, so forgive me if I don't articulate this well, is at some point the barrier to entry of costs of who's able to get on podcasts based off their expertise. I'm concerned that we might lose the true authentic stories of somebody who just really has a powerful message to share, but doesn't have a budget behind it, doesn't have a real influence or way to get around it. Because now as hosts, we can be so picky saying, sorry, you got to pay this much money. You have to have this many followers. You have to have achieved this, this, and this, because that criteria can be so high because now there's 30 people that match that criteria. We're not even looking at these people that are like, I have a real message to get out. I don't have any following. I don't have any real clout. I don't have any experience, but I know that I want to serve the world with this. Many podcasts are saying, get lost, get out of here. I'm going to go with the highest bidder, basically. And the problem with the highest bidder is they've locked in their agenda so well that they are going to articulate it through the podcast versus a true authentic story. Not saying they're not real or authentic, right? But it's going to be harder and harder for us to find that. So I'm a little bit concerned about the future of podcasting because I wonder, is it going to remain this true transparent way of serving the world where anybody who has a message, it's something that can help somebody is going to show up and is just going to turn it into this top line people with the most money, the most influence, the most status that are going to just continue to share their agenda? That's just me personally. I don't know where to even go with that. We can change the topic, but that's what's keeping me up at night right now is how do we keep that from happening to make sure it stays super valuable for the average person who listens?
I think in general, whenever there's a new technology or new innovation, it starts out for everybody, but it slowly centralizes in. So I get it. It's becoming very, very difficult to compete with the big names, the celebrities that launch podcasts.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, Alex, that's where the specificity comes in. How specific can you get?
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Yeah.
How specific can you get? And I struggle with that too, but I do think that we're at an inflection point where it's getting close to, I need to pay to play, or I need to be very strategic about why I'm creating this content.
Yeah. I think from being a guest, you just have to get more. First off, your pitch has to be good. And I've talked about that many times. Your pitch to get on has to be good. There has to be a strong why behind it. It can't just be because I'm this, right? Or because I'm that. It's got to be really strong, but also that the message that you deliver consistently has got to be super impactful, because it used to maybe get on 10 shows, it might turn down to 5. That's happened for me. My pitch success rate used to be 97%, which is unbelievable. Now it's around 60%. I'm not sharing it any differently. I'm not doing any worse of a job or not putting the effort. But the truth is, there are 10 people more qualified to share anything that I've talked about even today, right? And now they're all going after getting on podcasts. So my competition is a lot more. So now I just have to remember, okay, I'm not going to get on as many as I used to, but I got to pack a punch when I'm there. I have got to show up in my best possible way to serve as much as I possibly can, to leave it all on the table, so that when I'm gone, I'm not like, oh, I wish I would have brought up those 4 things, right? Oh, that would have been really helpful. And we can always do that to ourselves. But in general, I have to be like, you know what? I left it all there. I gave it 110%. I'm going to trust that that's going to be impactful for people's lives.
Have you ever paid to be a guest?
I paid one time. It was mostly to test it out. I paid to be on Entrepreneurs on Fire. And it was interesting. like we have a different perspective on that whole thing, right? But like I was like, yeah, I want to give this a shot and see how it goes. And I'm a big fan of John and I are friends. And by the way, there's no exceptions. If you're his mom, you're paying $3,500. That is the hard, fast rule at his company, is that same price no matter who you are. Anyway, but yeah, that was the only time I ever did that. But something I like, Mark, that I think I'd like to see more people do is this idea of like a marketing boost. So as an alternative of like, okay, instead of charging my guests, like if they do a really good job, what if I offered them a way for us to run ads against that episode together? And then of course, be transparent. Hey, I'm keeping 30% because I'm doing all the work, right? I got to build out the assets. I got to do all that. It's the podcast. I got to get it all out there. But like, if you did that really well, and let's say you bumped out $1,000 and that converted for me as the guest, I'd be like, hey, can I give you another $1,000 and we do that again? Or can we jump into a $15,000 1-year contract? The win-win for the host is growing the podcast, you're earning a little bit of income, and you're making the guest look like a star. So like at the end of the day, like I have never had a host offer that to me. If a host did, and I did a good job and it was converting, I would throw money at that every day for as long as it's positive, right? So I think this idea of like a marketing boost with your guests might be a really interesting way to grow the show while driving a little bit of revenue. Not seeing anybody do it, but I think it'd be really cool.
That's literally what I'm doing. Literally.
Okay, well,
literally, but it's a mandatory guest fee. It's not like a, if you'd like to boost it, it's just,
I see,
but I'm blessed to be in that place because I have relationships with booking agents who send me guests. Mm-hmm. And I get so many cold guest pitches that I just had no way to screen them. I was just sending them all to this form to go and die. And now I said, hey, now there's a guest fee, and that's been a great funnel for
filters out your tribe. I think it's great. It works great for you, man. It filters out that tribe. And the fact that you're the only person I've ever met doing what I'm just calling a marketing boost is great. I mean, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think regardless, we all need to be figuring out how can we actually get some cash flow going, because having a show with no cash flow, I don't think is where we want to be. You've got to find.
It's tough. I mean, it's definitely, if it's your hobby, that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the very least, I always tell people, I'm like, offset your production costs at the very least, right? Yes. And Daniel, I agree. Mark is brilliant. He's one of my favorite people in podcasting. If he called me and said, I need you back tomorrow, I do this. And also if he hit me up with a text and said, I need your social security number, I'd give it to him because I trust the guy completely. So, but I would maybe question that a little bit. Like, why do you need that though? No, but anyway, like, where was I going with that? I saw that comment about Mark being brilliant. I just went with it, but I don't even remember where I was going. I'm so sorry.
Well, I appreciate you. And I just want to continue to innovate, try new things, bringing brilliant minds like yourself in here to kind of see where everything is going in the industry. Any other questions for Alex before we close down this mastermind session here, ladies and gentlemen?
We did our job, Mark. That's what that means.
That's it, baby. That's it, Alex. Well, I always love chatting with you. I look forward to repurposing this into more content. Don't forget, y'all, we got Jordan Harbinger next week, baby.
All right.
In the house. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. When's your next Podmatch event, Pod Pros event?
Yeah, we're calling it Pod Talks these days. It is April 20th. Took me a minute there. April 20th is the next one. Should be a lot of fun.
Good deal. Well, I'll definitely have a link below so people can check that out and apply to be a speaker, and lots of great stuff, Alex.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, honored to have been here. Again, I said just a minute ago, but Mark is brilliant. He's been a great friend to me in podcasting for years at this point. So it's an honor to be here with anybody. And if anyone has any questions at all, Mark, you can feel free to give out my contact information. I'm here to help and serve however I can. And what I do is just podcasting full time is all I'm into. So if anyone has anything they need or any way I can help, let me know. But it was an honor to be here today, man. I really, really appreciate it.